Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Canwen Xu. Canwen is a debut author whose writing has appeared in the Washington Post, the Kansas City Star, Chalkbeat, Areo Magazine, and more. She is a graduate of Columbia University, and Boring Asian Female is her debut novel. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's so fun to have you here, and I gobbled this book up. It was, there was really some deep, heartfelt moments and also some funny moments. I thought it was really well done. So, before we launch into all things about this process and your debut and all that, would you tell our listeners about Boring Asian Female?
Yes, so Boring Asian Female is about a senior at Columbia University, Elizabeth, who has basically spent her entire life, or most of her life, with one goal in mind, which is to get into Harvard Law School. So she has perfect grades, perfect scores, everything, and then she finds out that she was rejected and that someone else in her class at Columbia did get in. So then that sends her down a spiral of obsession and stalking, and yeah, she just does a lot of really unhinged things.
It's so fun, and you really do play on the sort of the funny tropes about like the Asian parent, like her motivation and all that, and also that she's like the only Asian person from the North. She's from North Dakota, and her best friend's from South Dakota. There's all
Yeah,
these
it's
kind of
flipped.
fun.
Yeah.
Flip,
Yeah.
sorry.
Mhm.
There's all these sort of fun. So you are obviously a Columbia student. You are not obviously a boring Asian female, but tell us, where did this idea come from? And and how did you get about? Because is this the first book you've ever written?
Yes, it is.
Okay, which
Yeah.
is really impressive. As everyone ever already told you that, that's really impressive to publish your first book that you've ever written. So tell us about where the idea came from.
Well, I think it was more that I wanted to explore a few different themes. So I think the first was that I really like the idea of, a friendship between two young women at this very pivotal moment in their lives, which is when you're in college. And it's like you are kind of an adult, but then you're not really an adult. And it's often for a lot of people, it's the first time living on their own and all of these dynamics that are taking place. I also really wanted to write about just what it was like to be a college student at Columbia, since that was also a very unique experience. It's a campus where people are very passionate about just a lot of different issues. And also I think what's really interesting is that you basically have a disproportionate number of people who come from some of the richest families in the world. And you also have a lot of normal people. And then you also have people with a lot of traumatic life experiences. And you just have all of these people in this bubble, which is so unique. And then I also wanted to write about failure. I wanted to write about when someone who has staked, their entire lives on something and then it doesn't go their way. I've always been curious to explore that process. And I really enjoy reading books that are kind of about, failure and when you kind of hype up a certain goal and then it doesn't really work out.
Yeah, and it really does, she's so sort of steady and focused, and then it really does sort of, like you said, unhinge her. She becomes quite, very obsessed. So, she becomes obsessed with this other the other woman who did get into Harvard Law School, and she sort of, as you said, falls down this rabbit hole. The friendship between the two girls, and I'm sorry, Elizabeth and
Engine.
yeah, and Jen, which was really interesting. So, I mean, I found that because in the end, Engine ends up being a little bit of her, the sort of stable, an attempt of a stabilizing force for her. Whether
Mhm.
that, succeeds or fails, you have to read the book. But so when you wrote this, when you wrote the first draft of this, because obviously for, our listeners know that oftentimes a book changes quite a bit from sort of the initial version of it to what comes out. Was that true for you, or
Yes, it was so true for me. So my process was, I think, relatively unique, even in publishing, where there's a lot of different unique processes,
Yeah,
and you can
us.
never know what to expect. So when I first wrote the novel, it was actually not a thriller at all. There was no character called Laura. There was no obsession plot. It was actually I pitched it to agents when I was querying as kind of a Sally Rooney, Lily King type coming of age novel set on a college campus. And you still have failure and you still have, all of these funny funny tropes about, Columbia students and all of that, but it was not a thriller. And then when I was meeting with different editors, I met with Angela Kim at Berkeley. During the first call, she actually said, she was like, well, what do you think about turning this into a suspense novel? And it came completely out of left field. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, well, I actually love thriller movies. Like, it's just my favorite genre of movie to watch. I don't really read a lot of thriller books, but I was like, that it's really interesting. The more I thought about it, the more the idea grew on me. So I ended up going with Berkeley, and they preempted the book actually, and then I basically spent 3 months rewriting it into a thriller.
Wow, that is a big change. And you obviously had your editor was helped in the process. At the end of that, was it basically this sort of close to this version of this book?
Yes, yes. After I had rewritten it to a thriller, I think there weren't too many changes, I would say. I mean, there were definitely some changes, but kind of the core of it was what it is now. Yeah.
Okay, I love that. Well, that's still pretty impressive. I mean, particularly if you could do all that in sort of 3 months to go from something that was, more sort of like a literary coming of age novel to something that's a literary thriller, really. I mean, it's very much a thriller from the time when when she doesn't get into Harvard. And so you said before we started recording, you mentioned that the process has been quite long. Things you did and did not expect. So this is your debut, which we talk about all the time because there's this kind of magical, you don't know what to expect as a debut. It's in some ways sort of the most exciting part of the because you don't necessarily know the sort of harder parts of the business yet. So what has been what's been the highlights of the debut process, and also sort of what were the things that you did not expect?
Yeah, well, I think I'll start off with what I didn't expect, since there were so many different things that
Yeah.
I didn't expect. I think I didn't expect just how drawn out the process is. I mean, you see a book when you're not an author, right? And you're a reader, you see a book on, the bookshelves, or you see a book at the library or the bookstore, and you don't really realize just how much time was spent on just getting this book there because you have the amount of time spent writing it. And for me, I think all in like writing, editing, it probably took me about 1.5 years or 2 years, something around that. And then after that, you're querying agents. And then after you get an agent, you're editing with your agent.
Yeah.
And then if you're lucky enough to get a book deal, after that, you're editing with your editors. And that
Yeah.
is a very long, drawn out process. So I think that was very surprising to me. Another thing is I knew that it would be difficult to publish a book, but I think I hadn't grasped just how difficult it is and how fickle it is because you never know what the market is looking for, right? And I was comparing my own writing to books that I was reading. I was like, oh, okay, like this got published, so my book is probably going to get published, but that's not at all a guarantee because you don't know the circumstances of when that novel was getting pitched and, on submission and all of that. So it really is a very fickle process. And I'm just grateful to, um, have been, I guess, one of the lucky ones. Yeah, that was really surprising. But I think the highlight of it is that the process has made me a stronger writer. I think that just the editorial feedback that I've gotten from my agent and my editors, I mean, it's like I just think that there's so many things that I learned about storytelling just through that process that I didn't know just, trying to write on my own.
Right. And so did you write this sort of right after college? You look like you haven't been out of college that long, and that's from somebody who's been out of college a long time. So I can't, but were you studying writing in school?
No, no, I wasn't. I mean, I have always dreamed of being a writer, but when I was young, my mom was like, "You can't." She was
Yeah,
like, "Don't
mine
go down
too.
that path," I'm like, and I was
Not
like, "Okay,
practical.
fair."
Yeah.
She was like, "There's a lot of jobs that require you to be a good writer. Just go and do one of those jobs. Don't, try to just make your whole
Right.
thing writing." But No, I didn't study writing in college. In college, I actually, it wasn't even like on my radar that I would publish a novel. It was
Okay.
more just, a couple years after college, I was reading a lot in my free time since I suddenly had free time again.
Yeah.
And then I was like, you know what? What if I just try to start writing? So I think I started writing this novel probably like 2 years out of college. Yeah, something like that.
And so the process from like the time when you finished your version of it, without the thriller elements and queried agents, how long did it take from that time to like where we are right now when the it's imminently coming out?
Yeah, so querying my agent, I think my querying process was relatively short. It was 2 months, and then my agent and we edited it for I think probably like two or 3 months, sometime in that period. And then I got the book deal in July of 2024, so almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, so that's what took a
So
long time. It was this,
yeah.
it was the, yeah, from there to, and that's because probably they had to slate it and then you did revisions and then they take all the time, all the time. Yeah, it's weird, right? Because you do feel like if the book is done, why can't it come out? Like, I mean, they like to get the arcs out about 6 months, at least 6 months in advance for all your early readers and all that stuff, but you still feel like within a year should be very reasonable.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean it is so it's funny because my day job is in tech, and in tech it's all about, moving fast, right? You have to move quickly. It's okay if it's not perfect, right? And I think publishing is very different because it is just a slower paced industry, I would say. And that actually was refreshing for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm just happy about how it all turned out.
Yeah, well, it's very exciting. So now, are you working on something new? You've already written two more books after this. What do you have going on right now?
Yeah, so part of my book deal for Boring Asian Female, it was a two-book deal with Penguin Random House. So I actually have written the first draft of my second novel, which is going to be about a serial killer piano prodigy person. So super exciting. And I'm gonna start the editing process for that soon, but right now it's just a draft.
That's so fun. Well, that's really exciting, and it'll come out probably next year. It sounds like you're on track.
Oh, I honestly don't know. I
Like
don't
I have no
know.
idea. But that's
Yeah.
that's another weird thing about the business, right? I think in our contract language, it generally says something like the book has to be published within 18 months of delivery and acceptance, which is when you've done your revisions and they say the book is ready to go. But that's a huge long runway. So now
Mhm.
how do you balance, you're still working in tech?
Yeah, I am.
So how do you sort of structure your writing time?
I write at night. So usually what I do is when I get home from work, I'll go and I'll usually work out, I'll do a yoga class, something like that. And then after that, I'll maybe eat like a really quick dinner, and then I will write for probably 2 hours. For me, what's worked for me is basically to just tell myself to show up, as in not have any kind of like you have to write, you have to finish the scene today, you have to do something today. I will give myself a word count every day if I'm really trying to, pump something out. But sometimes if that's just not really working for me, I'll be like, okay, all you have to do is just you have to do something to the manuscript every single day. So for me, the way it's worked for me is just consistency because I don't have a ton of time to just work on it for long periods.
Right, right. Well, I wrote my first four novels while I was working in finance, and in
Oh
some
wow.
actually, it's kind of funny. And I had babies too, which was insane.
Wow.
I can't even imagine that now. But I do feel like sometimes it's that like they talk about like the fuller your plate, the more efficient and effective you are. Because now I feel like I can waste 3 hours and be like, oh, not get anything accomplished. So I sort of, in some ways, those very structured times are very useful. Do you feel like when you're writing, are you writing 7 days a week?
When I'm writing, I am writing 7 days a week. Yes. It's like I'm either writing a lot or I'm not writing at all. Like right now, I'm kind of in a stage right now where I'm not writing at all. But when I'm writing, I'm really writing.
And do you feel like that is there a reason for that other than sort of like you're like, I need to get this done? Or do you feel like you're closer to the characters and it's easier to sort of, stay in touch with the story if you do that?
I think it's easier to stay in touch with the story, but also I think it's just my personality. I'm someone who likes routine. And
Yeah.
also if I do something, I just really do it, or else I just don't do it at all. Like recently I've gotten into Survivor and I've watched, 6 seasons of Survivor in a month or something. So
Wow.
I think it's just my personality. I don't know if it's a writing thing. I think it's just everything that I do.
Well, I mean, I do think it's sometimes like to be, to do this business, you have to be a little bit weirdly obsessive about things, right? Otherwise,
Yeah.
the book, there's nobody at your house being like, get this book done, usually,
No,
right?
no, definitely not. I mean, I think if I knew how hard it would be and how fickle the process is, I don't know if I ever would have had the motivation to go through with it. I think in a way my ignorance was bliss because now I know I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that worked out. But yeah.
But do you also feel like, you talk about, it's funny because one of the themes of your book that you talk about is this idea of failure. Can you imagine now, like, I mean, you can imagine maybe not having gone through the process, but can you imagine now, like, not doing it again?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I know I'm gonna keep doing this. Like, I think I just have to, right? It's
Right,
just something that I have to do.
right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think one thing I tell people when they ask me about writing is I tell them that you can't write for the sake of getting published. You have to be okay with writing the novel and knowing in your head there's a really good chance that no one else is going to see it. And if you don't think it's worth it, then don't do it. You can't, I would say don't write for the sake of getting published.
Right. You have to write for the sort of like the love of of telling the story, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Now, what are
exactly.
the things that you sort of mentioned some of the things. What are the things you sort of are like, you know, you look back and think I didn't, or maybe you did from the beginning sort of think I know these themes that are going to be in my book, or was it sort of like did you find that you finished the book and you're like, wow, I didn't expect this thing to sort of rise to the surface the way it did?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, a lot of people, early readers of the book have been saying that one theme in it is social media and how you can't trust what someone's version of their life that they put on
Yeah.
social media is. I guess because I'm kind of on the older end of Gen Z, but because I'm on the older end of Gen Z, it felt like that was just, I kind of take that for granted
Yeah.
that everyone has social media and
Right.
everyone obviously puts an aspirational life on their social media. I think for me, I felt like I just have always taken that for granted. And then like including all of those things about Elizabeth stalking Laura's Instagram, that
Right.
just felt like just so normal to me.
Yeah,
Like
what
just
you would
like
do. Of
yeah,
course, it's what we
right.
all do
Like
all the time, right?
yeah. But I think that's something that people are noticing about the book of, you never know what someone is going through. And it's not something I think I consciously put in the book, but I am glad that it's something people are pointing out.
And I think that actually a lot of the characters that we meet in the story, there's something else going on behind the scenes with them that, that, and because of how, obsessed Elizabeth is, there, she doesn't necessarily recognize that, she only sees what's going on in her own world, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Which is, first of all, it's the age. I mean, like you
Mhm.
said, there's this age where you're an adult sort of, but you're not really. And the world still sort of revolves around you and the things you want, the things you think you deserve. And so it's, you're not necessarily aware of, where everyone else falls into that, which I really appreciate. I also appreciate the conversation about wealth, like these two girls who come from the Dakotas, from very sort of, no, normal, middle America type homes. And then we're sort of thrust into New York City and the sort of wealthy, wealthy, wealthy environment of that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And just the different levels of wealth that you see when you're in New York City. I mean, right, like I grew up in North Dakota and South Dakota and
Okay, you did.
Idaho.
Okay, I wanted to know
So,
that.
yeah, so I
Yeah.
mean, again, like it was like when I thought of wealthy, when I was young, I was like, oh, both your parents are doctors or something like that. And I wasn't quite used to the scale of it that I saw when I got to college. So that was one of the elements that I wanted to talk about. That was definitely one of the themes that I wanted to intentionally pull when I was writing the book.
Yeah, yeah. New York City is a rare specimen of that. And so in the new book, when you wrote this book, did you sort of have an idea about how the story would unfold? Are you somebody who sort of had mapped it out?
Oh, I'm not an outliner at all. I don't map things out. I mean, I every time I try to map something out, what happens is I get to that part in the story and it doesn't feel right, or I just get another idea that I feel like is just way more compelling. So, I don't really brainstorm beforehand or write an outline. I'm very much just I just have to do it and then something will come to me. And with the second novel, when I was in the process of talking to my editor at Berkeley, I did have to write a synopsis of it.
Yeah.
And when I actually wrote the draft, I followed the synopsis as in the some of the plot points are still there, but it definitely felt like it changed what it actually got on the page. So I feel like I'm more kind of based on those vibes rather than pre-planning it.
And do you feel like ever that with the sort of not being able to plan it, and I've never successfully written an outline, so I'm with you there. And people do it and write beautiful books, but so when you're in there, are there moments when you're like, I don't even know where this goes, and does and how is that a struggle, or are you just sort of are you able to be like, okay, I'm just going to follow the characters to the next place?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I have an overarching vision of where the story is supposed to go. Like, I know, for instance, that in Boring Asian Female, the obsession with Laura is going to slowly escalate and eventually come to a head. So I know what I'm building towards kind of overall, but I don't necessarily know the specific stops on the way. So that's kind of more of the way I think about it. But I do make sure that every scene has a purpose. I want it to be building towards something. I want it to generate momentum for the story. I want it to have a purpose. So it's never like I'm writing a scene and I don't really know where it's going. I actually did that in the beginning when I just was really just first started to write. And I realized that that ended up just, again, it takes out the momentum from the story. So I try not to do that.
Right, right. Well, it's so the story that you're working on now, where did I mean you sort of sounds like when you the story about the boring Asian female came from sort of the idea of like being in New York and this new experience and coming of age. And so how did you and you obviously thought, okay, I'm writing another thriller now. Now that I'm in this thriller space, this next book is going to be a thriller. So how did you come up how did the idea form in your head for the
Well,
serial killing prodigy?
yeah, so my family lives in Kansas City now, and I was talking to someone in Kansas City, and they were telling me about this young woman who had murdered her mom when she was in high school. And it was because it was something about how her mom was very strict about her playing the piano, and it was
Wow.
like it was just like the pressure became too much. And then I just became so fascinated with the story. And I was like, well, what if I wrote kind of like a fictionalized version of that?
Yeah.
And then eventually, after talking to my editor and kind of fleshing out the story a bit more, it became less of like this specific instance of her, murdering her mother and more of just whether she is generally just a murderer, and
Right.
um I played classical piano for 10 years. I started when I was 6 and I quit when I was 16. So I think that I can understand how, the pressure that comes with that can drive someone to do just really unhinged things. So that was where the inspiration came from.
It's so fun. It's a super fun idea. I love that. Well, before we go, we will be giving away a copy of Boring Asian Female on either the Facebook Killer Women Facebook group over there, Danielle's Killer Women, or on Killer Women Podcast on Instagram. Tell our listeners where they can find out about you and what you're working on and all the things.
So I have a website that I vibe coded with Cloud Code. If you want to check it out, it's just canwenshu.com. But I'm pretty active on Instagram, so you can just find me there.
Okay. And are you also Canwen Xu on Instagram?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you got this was a real I had so much fun reading this book and actually if you're not looking if you're not watching us and you're listening to us on a podcast form, go and look at the cover because I think they also did a really fabulous job. And I really do love I just love the fact that Elizabeth really, in the beginning, she just feels like she's done absolutely everything right. And what she realizes is that somehow the thing she's missing is like the extra, right? The like what the thing, and so that's the title, Boring Asian Female, which I just thought was so clever and funny. Because I think that's what we were all raised to do, which was just to perform. And we didn't ever really think about like well, what was going to be the thing that made us stand out. We had all, we're just trying to hit all the boxes. So anyway, I thought that was really, really clever, Cameron. It was so fun to talk to you today.
So great to talk to you as well.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today on Killer Women with Canwen Xu, and we will see you next time. Bye.